Welcome into Kindred Spirits here on the RFK Refugees Podcast Network, covering another team, another DC related team that is not having the greatest of seasons. And we got a show, we got a game to talk about. We got more news than probably we thought we were going to have to talk about. We got more details on the Chris Ward dismissal. John, should we jump right into it? Should we do the weekend? Should we do the
No, let's just talk about this. Let's just talk about the current dumpster fire that is the Washington Spirit on and off the field.
Jeez. You know what's like it's so insane to me and I'm like exasperated at this point. I think a lot of people are exasperated at this point. But like we all thought that when the ownership situation was settled, we thought, okay, this is going to be like the end of the drama's over. Everything's over. Like there's no drama, no controversy. They just won a championship. They just did everything that you could expect. And everything's going to go great, right? And the season's not going great. Okay, that's fine. Season's not going great. But there's no, like, it's clearly like better than what's been going on. And then it's like that all just has been in the past week. Got completely turned on its head. John, do we want to start with what sort of was released, or do we want to start with the Chris Ward stuff? Do we want to talk about the game a little bit?
Let's talk about the game, and then we'll go backwards, I guess.
Yeah. So, so Washington Spirit 2-2 draw again, giving up a last minute stoppage time goal. I think they're like 30th from the 30th this year in a 22 game season. I'm pretty sure they played scrimmages in that, and it's been a huge issue for this team. I don't really know. Like it's very clear that it's like at this point now it's like it's been a disappointing season, and I think it just punctuates this. I think we kind of all thought, hey, okay, they're going to come in. You know, they got a new coach bump, so hopefully they play well, and I think they played a little better. They looked. You could see some of the movement and some of the excitement that we see out of the trio of Hatch, Rodman, and Sanchez.
we saw chunks of that in the previous game against Portland as well. So they're unable to put 90 minutes together right now, regardless. I think that's just the situation. The first goal Houston scores is a stupid goal. It's a cross off a dead ball situation. Hits Sam Staub in the feet, almost rolls into the net, is kicked out of the net, and then Sophie Schmidt from 3 feet out tucks it in. Just sort of the embodiment of the season in a goal right there, pretty much. And then the Spirit are fighting from that point on. Mentality, heads drop a little bit because because we have been there this season, and that's what we're talking about. A stupid goal scored in a dumb way is like the one of the subtitles for the season, unfortunately.
Is this a scenario for you? Do you think this team, the first thing they look is to retool this team defensively? Do you think they bet too much on players like Kelly O'Hara, Sam Staub, that they would continue performances? Karina Rodriguez was called up for the Mexican national team. I don't think she's taken that next step that I kind of thought she would this year. I think it's been an overall struggle for this team defensively. And it's shown they have not been able to find wins or anything, much of anything.
And maybe we'll talk about this, or I'll talk about it now. Potentially some of those players are free agents. Unfortunately, the league and the Players Association cannot agree how big the list of free agents is and who is actually included in it, which is just, again, perfect for everything that's going on. But Kelly O'Hara's on that list. Sam Staub, I would say, has done the best she can. I think she's their iron woman. Yeah. She's stayed healthy. She's had some good games. Was not as good as she was last year, but has also had probably 10 different center back pairing partners this season. So Amber Brooks is a player I'd like to see them probably move on from. Kelly O'Hara is a player who struggles to stay on the field. That was the story at Utah Royals. She's already played much more and more meaningful minutes for the Spirit than she ever did for Utah, because I believe she never got on the field for them because she was injured and then took the year off for COVID. I don't know the salary. The challenge is, unlike MLS, we don't really have any idea about what their salaries are, what they are relative to the cap. Emily Sonnet, another player who you would assume is on a pretty high level contract, who misses time for the national team and has not necessarily put her stamp on the club. Played well at some points last year, but those are spots you could potentially spend money on other players. So I think that's certainly something to look out for. In the attack, they're set, and we'll talk about that.
Yeah.
We'll just say Ashley Hatch. All she can do is score. It's amazing that this player is so consistent on a team that has challenges really finding a consistency this year. She's played in only 13 matches and has scored 7 goals. Like, ridiculous. I think if she had a full season, if international duty did not rob her from this team, although she, at least she played for them this year, unlike say Aubrey Kingsbury, who was gone most of the season and was gathering cobwebs on the bench. But she's great. Trinity Rodman has, I would say, improved here in this last 5 or 10 games. She has sort of like reasserted, like, yes, I am the highest paid player in NWSL. I am very good. I will now be very good. Her and Ashley Sanchez, that triad is something you build around and don't mess with for sure. Yeah. It's just everything else is somewhat in question.
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously, I think the one benefit the Spirit has, as opposed to the other team that plays at Audi Field in DC United, is that finishing low in the table gets you a high draft pick, and in this day and age, having a high draft pick actually does mean something.
No academies means actual real talent coming out of the college draft.
Yeah, so there is actual talent that you can grab, and you can build maybe around that defensively. I'll be curious to see what the draft looks like. I have no insight into.
We'll have to bring Travis Clark on to the show.
Travis Clark, Travis Clark. I'm sure we'll have him on. His, as he jokes, his annual appearance on the show, running the circuit of all podcasts, because he's the one who actually pays attention. So it's good for him. So we'll see what this team can do. I think there is some opportunities, like you said, to bring in some different players. And they're going to have a new coach.
They will.
A new coach to drive this whole thing. Should we do anything else you want to get in this game, or should we get into the meat of the argument?
Just Kingsbury's error on the tying goal is a dagger. Alonzi, I believe, I'm trying to think if she was the one who scored against Houston, scored against the Spirit last time.
I'm going to exonerate Kingsbury a little bit from that. I think on both goals there is a failure.
First one for sure.
On the defensive side to actually track the defender to go to the ball and to clear the ball on that in both those situations, in my mind.
I would have liked to have seen her caught that ball though, or push it a little bit wider. That's been the problem has been spilling rebounds, and similar to DC United, again, another team we've watched a lot. Poor rebound discipline, like poor management of rebounds, and that's it's a struggle. That's a hard thing to do, but Kingsbury has been able to do that in the past, and this year she's not been very good at it.
Yeah, so I think this whole team is just like ready. We're all ready for a reset on both the Washington Spirit and DC United. We are ready for hopefully a quieter year, where the Challenge Cup is not a main fixture. Obviously, we're still going to have the World Cup next year. That's going to be the big gap. We'll see what the lineup looks like. We'll see if any players might drop off, who maybe were getting appearances. That World Cup roster is going to be interesting to see. And you know what, teams might take off. I think NWSL needs to evaluate how many games they want to play.
They're breaking for the World Cup this year or next year.
Good.
That is what
good.
I've read.
They should.
It's
good. They should.
So
they absolutely should.
So we'll get to the second piece of news here. So last week, all we had to go on was a tweet, and all anyone had to go on was a tweet, because that's what the Spirit decided to do. After the game, after another poor Andy Sullivan, God bless Andy Sullivan, who always has to go out and do press for the Spirit, mostly because she's an amazing quote. This was pre-written, clearly. But she had something to say about Chris Ward and his termination. You know what? We probably should have done the Athletic article first, but we're going to do it backwards. So,
I think in the Athletic article, it was mentioned that a player came to Chris Ward after the whole incident in training,
which is probably Andy.
We have no doubts that was Andy Sullivan. Yeah. Like, no question about it.
I also think that was Andy probably dragging off the player who was unwilling to leave the field at the time, sort of like. But so Andy says, I'll read the quote in full. She says, we'd like to start off with a statement on behalf of the players. Firstly, we are frustrated that this is necessary given our history. Secondly, we are angered by Chris Ward's answers in the piece by The Athletic. We know the idiom that there are two sides to every story, but that is simply not the case in this scenario. We know his interview to be a completely inaccurate recollection of a serious situation, and furthermore, the apology offered to us last Friday demonstrates a misalignment in his words and actions towards the team. The players fully support the decision of the club to relieve him of his duties as head coach, and we have every intention of cooperating in a proper course of action as it relates to the circumstances like this one. We will no longer take any questions regarding his dismissal or make any further comments on it at this time. We are focused on our current performances and the rest of our season moving forward as a group. So, great statement by the captain. So let's talk about what she's refuting, basically, or what she's talking about. Chris Ward talked to Pablo and I think Meg Linehan, earlier in the week, sort of saying what his version of events were. So what we know there is that all we know is that there was a tweet and that was it. And there was no follow-up answers. And unfortunately, because there was nothing else, I'm sorry, also Mark Krikorian had a media availability, but he was basically saying something happened and we made a move, basically. And we can't say anything else because there are potentially things afoot. That was what we had. Very shortly after that, I believe almost like maybe an hour after that, I'm trying to get my timelines right. I know I was eating sushi during this article coming out. But basically, Chris Ward's view of it was we were in practice, we were doing a training element, and one player was not getting my commands or not getting sort of what we were trying to do, and I told them to get off the field so that we can instruct them. The player would not leave. He got a little bit more animated and then started yelling at the player. Again, this is all Chris's recollection of it, and had to have her leave the field, and she wouldn't leave. Eventually, another player came and grabbed them and took them off. And that was, from his perspective, that was it. It was a little bit of, I think he said, sort of a weird atmosphere after that, but that was all he knew. He goes to his office. A player comes in and tells him, "Whoa, that was extremely not okay. We do not like the way this went." Chris says, he responds, says, "You're right. Sorry. I didn't mean to react in that way. I shouldn't do that. I need to fix it." Then there was a players retreat scheduled. He says that he was like, I won't go. I'll give you guys space. And also that was also Mark's idea too, is like, let's not have that happen. Chris Ward, apparently, according to him, had spoken to all of the players, briefly before that, a couple weeks before that, basically to be like, where are we on this? How is the season going for you? Is there anything I can, do? To his idea, he got no responses indicating to him that he had a problem in the locker room. As Steve Goff said, clearly that's incorrect by the way things went with this. Either they didn't say anything or he didn't hear it or whatever else. There was a miscommunication there between the players and Chris about how the season had gone. Chris then talks to team council that weekend on Sunday, says, "Hey, I need to talk to you about this. I think we have to figure out where we're at." And then council says, "Sure, Mark will come in on Monday." And he says, "I don't want Mark there." And the council says, "Tough, Mark's going to be there." So then Mark was there on Monday, and then he got fired. And he says they went through it. They talked about it. They said that there are some things at play here that were out of your control as far as results go. And they sort of said, "We're not going to say anything else about this. You can say whatever you want." Sort of allowing him to. So he was not under gag rule, clearly, because he talked to The Athletic. And there's not a severance thing at play where he couldn't speak about it. But he acknowledges that the practice was filmed. So what was said and how it was said and what body language there, we're never going to see that. But NWS, the Players Association and the league will be able to see that and be able to make their own judgment about what happened and was he menacing a player? Was he physically intimidating to the player? The struggle I have with all of this is that, and even in Andy's statement, we don't have an idea of, is this a pattern of behavior, or was this one dude flying off the rails and having a bad and acting inappropriately? That's not to say that's not enough to be fired, right? Like if you snap at work, it's entirely possible that you can be fired from doing. Say you had an okay year up to that point and did that one thing. You understand that that's enough sometimes to get you fired. The problem is we're not going to know that. We're never going to know that. All we have here is we have Chris's side, and then we have the players saying that what happened was unacceptable, and we're going to go through the proper channels and we're not going to talk about it anymore. So it leaves people to, say, all right, well, how are you going to feel about this? I'll speak me, and then you could say you. And for me, after hearing Andy's side of it, I think what happened is Chris thought it wasn't a big deal. The players think it is a big deal. And the team agreed with the players. And that's that. And that's okay. Chris is not Richie, but he made a mistake. And he was going to get fired at the end of the year, according to sources, based on performance. And if the team had decided, and after this incident, I said, I don't want to work with this man anymore, that's fine. I think that this was the right move for all involved. I think the team blew this. From a communications perspective, I think that this was a mistake to do one tweet. I think it was a mistake to not provide that context. It was a mistake to make Andy do that and not have communications step out and speak on the entire issue and say, I think I talked to somebody else about this. I would have said, and this is after Andy's thing, I would have said, effective immediately, Chris Ward is no longer the head coach of the Washington Spirit. We appreciate his efforts up to this point. We do believe, particularly after an incident that occurred at training this Friday, that it makes sense for us to move forward in separate directions. We are working with the Players Association and NWSL to pursue whatever necessary action needs to be placed. But we are looking forward and trying to find a manager for the rest of the season and years beyond. And then Andy wouldn't have to speak, and people wouldn't have to think he's Richie Burke, and they would know that he did something out of bounds that was enough to get him fired. That's how I would have handled it. Ted, what's your general takeaway?
I mean, yeah, I guess that is. You do look at coaches like Richie Burke, coaches like Ronnie Dahlia got send-offs that were that at least got nice press releases, and they were horrid people and horrid coaches, and there was long tracks of abuse from all those coaches. And I think Chris Ward, I do take a little issue with, well, he wasn't as bad as Chris Ward, he wasn't as bad as Richie Burke. And I think that should not be a line. I'm sorry, it shouldn't. That should not be a line.
In another league, it wouldn't
be. We draw. Yeah. That it really should not be a line that we draw here. And we shouldn't say, oh, well, if you're slightly better than Richie Burke, you're fine.
Not slightly
Ricky,
better.
Well, that's
not saying the N word. It's saying the N.
That's what you're saying. That's what you're saying.
You are saying that different. I'm saying one incident that occurred versus Richie Burke, who hounded players out of the league, who allegedly said the N word at training, who made players have nervous breakdowns and quit soccer. None of that's happened this year. No one's accusing him of those other things.
Fair.
And in another league, if I only say that because in NWSL, coaches have been fired for sexually assaulting and grooming players. Coaches have been fired for being overtly racist. And because all they said was he's gone. That is, I think, you wouldn't have to do it any other league. Any other league, coaches get fired for a bunch of reasons that aren't like, send him to jail, either in the set of public. That's the only reason I make that. That's the only reason I make that distinction. What he did was out of bounds. He should be fired for it. He was fired for it. Say all that, and then we can part as part the way that we should part.
I think regardless if the statement is made by the team, I think that the players still come out and make that statement because, again, there's no gag order on Chris Ward. I think he wanted to get his side out there. I think I have to think that there was more that had to have been going on, regardless of whether Chris Ward thinks it was or not. I mean, I think there are certain things. I think this incident was a culmination of events. I think we've heard now that the team was already planning on letting Chris Ward go. I think things had gotten sour way before this incident happened. I think regardless of whether he wants to admit it or not. And I think there is some reasons to be concerned about if he's given another job. I think, again, I talked about earlier, it's easy to be a coach when you're winning. I think what we saw was when he was under pressure as a top level manager, he cracked. And whether that was the only incident or not, he lashed out probably because of the pressure he was feeling as the manager, who was probably looking for another job at that point, or at least had that in the back of his head. He had to have had some semblance.
Mark Krikorian had a spy on his team, on his staff for a month before he was fired. So certainly he had to know he was in the hot seat. So to your point, certainly was feeling the pressure. I think we're going to disagree about sort of his suitability for another position, I think, but that's totally fine. I understand your point. And another thing in your favor is that if he misjudged that this was out of bounds, it's entirely possible that other occurrences happen throughout the year. We're not owed anything. I think the challenge is, since you're not owed anything and since you have to make your own judgments, you're going to have a spectrum of sort of viewpoints on that. And I think that they're all to some degree valid, but the situation remains that this team has had to fire 2 coaches in 2 years, for
and winning a championship in between that, which is wild.
Them, which only speaks to tell you the talent on this roster. I don't know another coach. I don't know, given the particular hand that this was given this year, I think that I struggle to think of a coach that could have put this team maybe better than it is. I think certainly there are points on the table, points were left sort of like late. That's not necessarily anything about, the players themselves. So I think there are certainly maybe coaches could have got them out of the current position they're in, but there were things that were certain immutable events, like the schedule, like the 7 of your players going international duty, that would have made anybody challenged to get points. The weakness at the bottom half of this roster, probably caused by how big the top half of this roster is. Not most teams don't have that, are able to spread that money a little bit more evenly instead of having to find a bunch of national team replacement players. Regardless, the team finds itself in a similar position to DC United, playing out the string in some ways. I think they're not mathematically eliminated, but maybe they are, or they probably should be. Gotham is technically 1 game in hand below them, but lower on points. But I don't think that this. I think the announcer in the game, Houston game, after they scored the second goal, was like, "This could be the turnaround, like last year. Right on the back of this, they're going to go." And it's like, "No, man, no, not
no.
Not going to happen."
That team at the time was like out of the playoff picture, but like very clearly still in the hunt. And then they went on that incredible, massive run to move up their position. The season's over, regardless of,
in every way, pretty much, except for the fact that there are games.
It's sad to see, but it is what it is right now with this team, and they're looking for another coach. And I hope they get this. They almost have to get this one right. Any coaching situation, you have to get this right. But I think I would certainly like for them. I guess my biggest fear is it does feel like that Mark is the one in charge right now.
For sure,
he is the one running. He is running the show.
Stephen Goff says he's making like 2 or 3 times what Ben Olsen was making, and Ben Olsen was making $300K, and people were having heart attacks about that. So now your GM is making quite a bit more than that, much more than the technical staff, much more than anybody else that works at the club. So just keep that in mind.
And there is a concern there that he's going to go to will he bring an assistant in? He's already talked about it. It was rumored that he already has an assistant in. Is that assistant then suddenly going to get the job of head coach? Is that how this works? Is he go in and find somebody else who he can bring in? How does that, when you give somebody that much control, how much control are they willing to cede? That's
a good point.
It just feels, it has me worried. It has me worried that so much has been put on this guy who I guess has run a extremely successful program at Florida State, which is good. And I'm not saying that's not worthy of consideration, but it's very concerning, I guess. We're in a very unsure place, and I was not expecting that this year. I was expecting to be in a very sure place. And I think there are questions for me as to who do you hire? You bring in a big time coach like a Mark Parsons, they're going to want more control over the roster than maybe that Mark's willing to give them.
That is something to really focus on, I think, because it was asked him in the press conference before I read Chris Ward's piece, and he was basically like, I have no ego here. I'll cede as much control as required to the coach. I'll have my thoughts and I'll contribute those where I think I'm helpful. But for the most part, that the coach is hired to coach. Chris Ward said that was not how his experience was. They had this assistant who was a defensive, what they call him, consultant for July. He made it sound basically like there were some things that were suggested, and there were a lot of things that were saying my way or the highway on the soccer side. So in the way that the maybe training was being run, certainly there was no players coming in, so that's not an element of this. So yeah, well, who the next coach is? Chris Ward is a longtime scout and assistant coach, and this was his first turn at the big gig. And they almost had to give it to him after winning the championship. They were very hemmed in there. I think that they would have struggled to find a reason not to give him a chance. But like you're saying, who are you trying to get? It's similar to DC United. It's similar. It's like, do you want to give somebody that's getting their first shot? And it's Angela Salem. Do you want to give her the job? It's her first time. She's 2 years out of playing. I don't know. I don't think so. I think you cannot have a learning on the job situation with this talented a roster, because you're going to waste potentially for someone that doesn't know exactly what they want to do as a coach. So Mark does not want to take over as coach, but I think that whoever comes in with the money that he's being paid, and Michelle Kang has clearly some major confidence in him, you're going to have to deal with him. You're going to have to deal with him, and you're going to have to deal with knowing that these players are not going to just take it. Whatever it is, if it's something that they feel is unjust, they're going to make sure that you know about it, and the team is going to take fast action. So you've got to have your stuff in order to come coach this club. You should have it in order everywhere, but for sure here you've got Mark Okorian, who is he's going to be a presence on the field. He's going to be in trainings. He's probably going to have his assistant on the staff, regardless of whether whoever you bring in. I bet that guy's going to stay there. And Michelle Kang is saying, I'm going to be a players first organization. They're our major asset. So treat this asset the way that I want them to be treated, or you're gone. So it's a different coaching environment than maybe some NWSL coaches have been in the past, but this is the way it's being run. So I think that'll be a very interesting search. They have an interim coach to be named shortly. He's going through background checks. He or she, I'm not sure. That's unclear. I would bet this week probably that gets named. But going to 2022 or 23 with the draft coming, you've got Mark Okorian there. That's basically why you hired him. So that is his college knowledge and evaluation is sort of like his bailiwick. So it doesn't matter if you like to have the full-time coach assigned by then, but if you don't, you're in good hands. Yeah.
We'll see. I wonder, like, I'm thinking of like some big names that you could bring in. Is also, I mean, or do you find a talent that you can think that is going to be that next thing and throw them in there? Who knows?
You could do that if you want to have Mark sort of have a heavy hand on the till. You could afford to do that, right? Like sort of groom that next.
I think you're going to need a guy. You're going to need some person that does not have an ego to think they know, because it's still a very unique situation. I think even in NWSL circles, a lot of the coaches kind of run the show as far as like recruitment and everything. I mean, that was certainly the way it was with Richie Burke. I mean, when Richie Burke was here, he was running the show. Comms. He was the technical guy.
He ran every single part of the club, and that was okay for their current ownership. Ross Wilker says that next coach has to get the most out of Trinity Rodman. Absolutely.
And Ashley Sanchez, 100%.
Highest paid player in the league. Got to make sure that she is healthy, on the field, happy, engaged, and scoring.
If there is one player I expected maybe to take more of a bigger step this year, it was Ashley Sanchez, and I don't think she's done that this year. I think she's been kind of the weakest of the trio.
Played amazing for the national team.
Yes, so she's done well for the national team, but I think it's been tough goings for her this year, and I mean it's been tough goings overall over the field. But
few players to Anna Halford did not take that next step. Yeah,
but again, things can change when you get in. I mean, Anna Halford took major steps in her first year. I mean, she was really a underrated part of this team, I felt, heading into that final stretch of the season, and played a huge role in the championship as well. So I think you get a better team, you get a better start to this year. Hopefully NWSL has learned some errors from the schedule. And, like I said, I also think like the team that is currently constructed would be attractive for any coach. There's so much talent that you can take advantage of. And if you feel like you can direct that energy well and can get buy-in, the sky's the limit really with this team. This team could become a dominant force in NWSL. It absolutely could. It could become a North Carolina like dynasty. And the fact that you almost get this year, like you know the talent is better than what the results are on the field, and you get that high draft pick where you can bring in maybe another generational talent out there on the field. You have some room maybe if you're maybe looking to offload some players. Honestly, any coach, I think there are probably a lot of coaches that look at this job and say, you know, if the ego's not too much from Mark, or it's a good situation I can manage, there I could really make a name for myself here and really grow as a coach.
I agree with that.
We'll see. It's going to be interesting offseason across the board for all DC sports teams. It's
want to make sure I get our plug in for our Patreon, patreon.com/RFK Refugees. We've got a couple new folks. Ross, who's actually, I believe, watching the show right now on Twitch, joined us, I believe, this week. The idea there is you get the show earlier. You get the show as soon as it's done. We've had some technical problems tonight, so we'll see if that's the case tonight. But usually tonight or very early in the morning the next day. And you get all of our interviews a week early. So you've had an opportunity to get not Sam Staub. You had Julia Rotter. You got her early, and you also got a chance to get Bailey Feist early before everybody else. So it's I think a great opportunity. You get to make sure you get your questions answered for all these players, and suggest players you want to hear from, and then we get that done for you. So if that's interesting to you and you want to support the show that way, patreon.com/RFK Refugees, and also, hey. Join us if you're a listener to the show. Join us on Twitch. We are normally 9:00, but sometimes we go long. So if you just want to hear Spirit Talk, if you can join us at 9 p.m. on Mondays, you'll maybe catch a little bit of DC United talk towards the end, but then you'll get the Spirit live and you can engage with us in the chat. So something to think about.
Yep. All right, folks, that's going to do it. Thank you so much for listening. We will catch you guys next week.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Whew.